This hearing will come to order. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing on real-time forecasting for renewable energy development. The United States has tremendous potential to expand our use of renewable energy resources. According to a study by the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, the accessible wind potential in just 12 states could power the entire country over twice. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has also shown that if we took 1% of the total United States land area and covered just a quarter of it with currently available solar panels, we could meet all of our energy needs. In addition, the Electric Power Research Institute has found that we could more than double our electricity generation from water power just by harnessing our nation's ample marine and hydrokinetic energy resources. But as we've often pointed out in this committee, and it is a stunning observation, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Now the intermittency of these sources could eventually be addressed through the widespread adoption of energy storage technologies such as batteries, fuel cells, and compressed air energy storage systems. And this committee has passed significant legislation to accelerate the advancement of each of these options. Right now, electric grid managers throughout the country are doing their best to integrate and balance several gigawatts of wind with baseload power options on an hour-by-hour and an even minute-by-minute basis. To ensure a steady flow of electricity to their consumers, these managers rely on forecasts of power production, which take into account weather information provided by NOAA, as well as energy technology research carried out by DOE or the private sector. Recent studies led by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory have shown that improving the accuracy and frequencies of these forecasts can have a major impact on the economic viability of renewable energy resources. I look forward to learning more from this excellent panel of witnesses on how we should best be addressing this important issue. With that, I yield to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Neugebauer, for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing and bringing together subject matter experts on not only energy, of course, but also the views of the national labs, the federal regulator, and economists, as well as forecasting from the private sector. At its most fundamental level, renewable power is about harnessing energy from the environment in some fashion. In that sense, being able to forecast the availability of those environmental sources, wind, solar, water, for example, at any one time is critical to knowing when and how much energy will be generated. Because of its rich oil and gas resources, there has long been an impression that Texas is behind the times when it comes to pursuing renewable energy. To the contrary, though, Texas is firmly established as the country's leader when it comes to wind energy. Almost 10,000 megawatts of installed capacity, more than double than any other state. And I'm sure many members have heard by now, because I never miss the opportunity to remind folks that the highest concentration of wind energy in America is produced in my congressional district. Despite many years, even decades of growth in subsidies and vast resources targeted towards research and development, renewable energy sources remain significantly more expensive than conventional counterparts, coal, gas, and nuclear. Yet still today, wind generation costs are averaging over $150 megawatt per hour, $150 per megawatt hour, and solar over $250 per megawatt hour, compared to conventional cost of approximately $100 per megawatt hour, to the frustration of many. Nonetheless, the last decade has seen significant integration of renewable energy into the electric grid, fueled by many of the subsidies as well as state-level renewable portfolio standard mandates. This growth has resulted in new and increasing challenges for both the industry and government, in particular because renewable energy sources such as wind and solar provide only intermittent contributions to the grid. They result in an increase of reliability concerns, as they ultimately must be backed by baseload power from conventional resources. The additional burden on baseload power supply to ensure overall grid reliability adds to the cost of delivering electricity. A key question that must be answered is to whom shall pay for this cost: the renewable energy companies that are being assisted, or the baseload providers that are doing the assisting. Regardless of the answer to the key question, there is a potential reduced reliability concerns associated with the integration of renewable energy with better weather forecasting and the incorporation of real-time information. As noted in today's testimony, improving forecasting accuracy by even just 1 or 2% can lead to millions of dollars in savings and alleviate reliability concerns. It seems the key to these improvement lies with NOAA, which has the responsibility for providing weather and water forecast and developing computer models that are then used by private sector to develop forecasting products for electricity suppliers. To this end, we need to make sure NOAA has the authority to pursue these activities through support of appropriately focused research and development in renewables forecasted weather forecasting service. I thank the witnesses for appearing before the subcommittee today, and I look forward to the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Neugebauer, and certainly with the increased pressure being felt by many to encourage alternative supplies of energy, I think today's witnesses will enable us to create that more effective, more efficient outcome out there, especially as we look at the situation in the Gulf today and the need to, I think, strengthen our entire comprehensive energy strategy. With all that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel of witnesses at this time. We begin with Ms. Jamie Simler, who is the Director of the Office of Energy Policy and Innovation for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. Seated next to Ms. Simler is Dr. Alexander McDonald, who is the Deputy Assistant Administrator of Laboratories and Cooperative Institutes within the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research at NOAA. Then Dr. David Mooney, who is the Director of the Electricity, Resources, and Building Systems Integration Center for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Then we have Dr. Pascal Storck, who is the Vice President of 3-Tier, and Mr. Grant Rosenblum, who is the Manager of Renewable Integration for the California Independent System Operator. And then finally, Dr. Robert Michaels, who is a Senior Fellow for the Institute for Energy Research. We welcome each and every one of you to the panel and look forward to hearing your testimony. As our witnesses should know, you will have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing, and when you have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the witnesses. Ms. Simler, you would begin, please.
Good morning, Mr. Tonko, Mr. Neuenberger, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Jamie Simler, and I am the Director of the Office of Energy Policy and Innovation at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I appear before you as a staff witness. My testimony does not necessarily represent the views of the Commission or any individual commissioner. My testimony will cover the motivations of the Commission's January 21st Notice of Inquiry on the integration of variable energy resources and a summary of some of the more relevant responses to the forecasting issues in that notice. The Commission regulates transmission and sales for resale of electric energy and interstate commerce. Its primary responsibility is to ensure that the rates, terms, and conditions of transmission service and wholesale power transactions are just and reasonable and not unduly discriminatory or preferential. As part of its ongoing responsibilities, the Commission issues public notices to solicit information on emerging issues that may affect jurisdictional rates and terms of service. The Notice of Inquiry on the integration of variable energy resources sought comment on the extent to which barriers may exist that impede the reliable and efficient integration of variable energy resources into the electric grid and whether reforms are needed to eliminate those barriers. The notice noted that while variable energy resources have many desirable characteristics, including low marginal energy costs and reduced greenhouse gas emissions as compared to conventional fossil fuel generation, they also present unique challenges. For example, because variable energy resources cannot store or control their fuel source, they have limited ability to control the production of electricity. With regard to forecasting, the Commission sought comment on several issues. These include the current practices used to forecast power production from variable energy resources and whether those practices would be adequate as the number of these resources increases. The notice also sought information on whether additional data, tools, and reporting requirements are necessary to accommodate state-of-the-art forecasting. A related question is whether safeguards need to be in place to ensure that commercially sensitive data remain protected. As to the issue of current forecasting practices, commenters note that the importance of understanding two aspects of variable energy forecasting, specifically national weather forecast and power production forecasts. National weather forecasts span large geographic regions and are developed by NOAA and associated government agencies. Power production forecasts are designed to predict the energy output of individual facilities. They build on the national forecast by incorporating additional site-specific information, such as the local atmospheric phenomena and specific generator equipment, to then develop a more detailed forecast of the anticipated power output of a given facility. These power production forecasts are generally developed by commercial forecast service providers and are specifically tailored to the needs of their clients, which could be a variable resource owner, a local utility, or a regional transmission organization. Some commenters note that existing national weather forecasts are optimized for predicting temperature and precipitation, and that additional data, models, and computing capabilities are needed to generate more detailed weather forecasts suited to the challenges of predicting the output of variable resources. A number of commenters also encourage the development of rapid update national weather models that utilize data obtained and shared from variable energy resources. Many commenters indicate that such improvements to the underlying national weather forecast could provide significant improvements to the ability of those in industry to predict the output of variable energy resources. Additionally, because different market participants often simultaneously engage in predicting the output of same variable energy resources, the notice included questions about whether the Commission should encourage centralized or decentralized forecasting protocols. Centralized forecasts are power production forecasts developed for system operators. The system operators use these forecasts in generator unit commitment process to ensure sufficient generation is online to meet load. Decentralized forecasts, on the other hand, are developed for individual variable energy resources and are used by them so that they can schedule their energy production. Comments indicate that there is likely a role for both centralized and decentralized forecasts. The accuracy of these power production forecasts is ultimately affected by the data inputs that are used. Because different data sets are available to different market participants, some forecasts may include less than ideal information. The notice therefore sought comment on these, and the commenters provided information on what type of additional information may be needed. Some commenters also noted about the confidentiality of commercially sensitive data, and they suggest that meteorological data collected from individual generators could be reported to a centralized repository such as NOAA. In summary, the Commission's notice of inquiry on the integration of variable energy resources brought forth a wealth of information on the topic of forecasting, much of which the Commission staff is still digesting. The full record, which is available through the Commission's document retention system, will be used by staff in making recommendations to the Commission for next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simler. Dr. McDonald, please.
And Congressman Nagelbauer and other members of the subcommittee. I'm Alexander McDonald, Deputy Assistant Administrator of NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. The ongoing Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf of Mexico reminds us that there are indeed risks of producing and delivering energy. These events also emphasize the need as a nation to look for new, cleaner forms of energy. As we explore possibilities for new power sources, it is exciting to contemplate creating clean and renewable energy from the sun, wind, and ocean. Today, I'll describe NOAA's current support of renewable energy sector and how NOAA's data forecasts and information play a critical role in maximizing the potential benefits from renewable energy. NOAA's current contributions to renewable energy include siting operation and support of management from our mission-driven and focused efforts. NOAA provides weather, water, and climate forecasts and information over a full range of time and geographical scales. It accomplishes this through remote sensing and imagery from satellites, surface networks, weather radars, upper air balloons, ocean buoys, ships, aircraft, and subsurface ocean observations. It uses sophisticated weather and climate models running on supercomputers to make forecasts such as those that accurately predicted the East Coast snowstorms this past winter. NOAA also has expertise to effectively evaluate the impacts of coastal and ocean energy projects, thereby protecting our natural resources of our coastal communities that our national economy relies on. With respect to hydropower, NOAA provides regular forecasts of precipitation, hydrologic forecasts of snow melt and runoff, as well as monthly precipitation outlooks. At the cutting edge of precipitation forecasting, NOAA's hydrometeorology testbed is researching how to forecast the most intense precipitation events. In each of these instances, NOAA works in a partnership with other federal agencies like the Department of Energy and Interior, FAA, NASA, and others. NOAA also works closely with the private sector and recognizes the contributions that private weather and climate service enterprise will continue to make in the nation's renewable energy capabilities. NOAA understands that cooperation and not competition with the private sector, academic and research entities best serves the public interest and best meets the varied needs of individuals, organizations, and economic entities. In the light of the tremendous information that NOAA currently provides the renewable energy industry, the needs of the industry are relatively new compared to the evolution of NOAA's other products and services. And the pace of the industry expansion is driving us toward developing new capabilities. The solar and wind energy sectors have generally highlighted that they require improved observations, global models, predictions across a range of timescale, and high-resolution forecasts to support the improved operational weather forecasts needed for their industry. Wind, for example, is typically not measured at the levels where wind turbines operate, over 300 feet above the ground. The lack of observations at this height leads to inaccurate forecasts, which are important for us to remedy. These inaccuracies drive added wind integration costs. With respect to solar energy, there are relatively few high-quality, continuous ground-based observations with which to evaluate current and future solar potential, and even fewer measurements of direct solar beam, which is essential for concentrating solar systems. These are good examples of the new and emerging requirements from the renewable energy sector that NOAA must address. We are collaborating with DOE and the private sector on a planned 12-month field demonstration project to improve the efficiency of wind energy through enhanced modeling and forecasting. We're working with the private sector and would like to play the role of honest broker, allowing us to collect data that would help improve the information we have. Last night, President Obama framed the challenge of renewing America's energy system as similar to the challenges America faced in its industrial expansion in World War II and putting a man on the moon. In the future, the renewable energy sector will need observations, forecast, and analysis in order to better integrate weather-driven renewable energy. NOAA has the experience, mission, expertise to work in partnership to address these needs. This nation can create a reliable, efficient energy system depending significantly on weather-driven renewable resources. The U.S. is big enough that if the wind's not blowing or if it's not cloudy in one part of the country, it's most likely blowing and sunny in another part. Improved forecasts, along with improvements in our national power transmission and storage, would allow us to meet President Obama's challenge. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Dr. McDonald. And we move to Dr. Mooney, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss wind and solar resource forecasting. My name is David Mooney. I'm the director of the Electricity Resources and Building Systems Integration Center at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. NREL is the U.S. Department of Energy's primary laboratory for research and development in renewable and efficiency technologies. I'd like to emphasize three main points in my testimony today. First, high accuracy, high resolution wind and solar forecasts are critical for enabling reliable and cost-effective large-scale deployment of wind and solar power generation. Second, while current state-of-the-art forecasts are very valuable to systems operators, there's considerable room for improvement. And third, there are important roles for both the public and the private sector in furthering forecasting technology. As we all appreciate, forecasts are needed because we are unable to control the weather that is the source of uncertainty in wind and solar generating power plant outputs. The inability to dispatch wind and solar then becomes a significant integration challenge to systems operators in high penetration scenarios. Therefore, reduction of uncertainty in renewable power plant output that can be achieved through forecasting is critical and serves two functions. First, forecasts allow the power system to be operated more reliably under high wind and solar generation deployment. And second, higher resolution forecasts with enhanced accuracy significantly reduce the cost of integrating large amounts of renewable generation into the existing power system. Renewable resource forecasts for utility operations have two main components. First is the prediction of the wind speed or the solar intensity at different times in the future, and second is the conversion of that data to power plant output. The first component has historically been the government's role. NOAA, through the National Weather Service, provides weather forecasts from which wind speed and solar intensity forecasts can be estimated. Industry's role is to convert those weather forecasts into predicted power plant outputs that are then packaged into customized products for systems operators to plan their generation mix. Currently, for a single wind power plant, energy production forecast error varies from about 10 to 15% for hour-ahead forecast and as much as 25 to 30% for day-ahead forecast. At these accuracy rates, though, forecasts are very valuable. An example is shown in NREL's Western Wind and Solar Integration Study, which found that for 27% wind and solar penetration across the 14-state Western interconnection, the use of state-of-the-art day-ahead wind and solar forecasts in systems operations, compared to not using any forecast at all, would save $5 billion per year, which is about 14% of total operations costs, so a significant savings. Even considering this impact, though, many improvements can be made to today's forecast. To that end, the public sector should undertake simultaneous improvement on three fronts. First, there is a need to further develop weather prediction models that focus on the physical phenomena that impact wind speeds and solar intensity. This involves improved understanding and representation of the atmospheric conditions that impact those quantities. Second, there is a need to better observe those phenomena that are needed as inputs to the weather prediction models. And third, there's a need to operate these models at higher temporal and spatial resolution. The public and private sectors currently work together very constructively. Private sector entities provide tailored renewable forecasts to systems operators using inputs to their models from the public sector. Given the substantial cost of conducting fundamental research in the areas of atmospheric physics, modeling, and observation, and the acquisition and assimilation of that data from the observations, and then running very computationally intensive models at high resolution over vast geographic areas, the public sector is likely best positioned to undertake these challenges that are of common benefit to all private sector forecasting industry members. It is anticipated that these higher quality data resulting from better understanding and modeling of fundamental atmospheric conditions will ultimately result in better forecasts that will enable more reliable and cost-effective wind and solar integration in support of our national objectives. To make progress in this critical area on a timescale that supports our energy goals, both the government and the private sector have essential roles, and we are eager to support and actively participate in the advancement of this vital field. I appreciate the opportunity to testify this morning, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. Dr. Stork, please.
Good morning, Chairman Tonko and the other members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to testify on the issue of public and private roles and research needs in renewable energy forecasting. Electricity generation from renewable sources such as wind and solar comes with a disadvantage that the output is variable and fluctuates as the weather does. As renewable energy generation has come to supply an increasing amount of the electricity consumed in our country, it has become clear that forecasting renewable energy output hours and days in advance is key to the cost-effective integration of this variable energy source. The first point that I would like to make is that small and medium-sized private businesses in the U.S. have assumed a leadership role in providing renewable energy forecasting services. Our sector is vibrant, competitive, and maturing, and is creating high-paying technical jobs and exports. Our company, 3-Tier, and our competitors routinely provide accurate forecasts of renewable energy output hours and days in advance to project owners, system operators, utility companies, and power marketers. Our company alone provides wind energy forecasts for over 12,000 megawatts of installed capacity, representing over 100 individual projects and serving over 40 unique clients. 3-Tier employs a staff of 60 staff in the production and delivery of these forecasts and other services for the renewable energy industry. To seize the opportunity of the global market, we have established offices in India, Latin America, and the Pacific Rim for the export of our energy forecasting services. As the renewable energy industry has grown, so has the experience level of the private sector in providing these forecasts. Our company was founded in 1999, and we have played an integral role in the improvement of forecast accuracy as we invest in our forecast systems to meet the demands of our clients. In fact, recent work overseen by NREL has demonstrated that the current state-of-the-art provides 80% of the value of a perfect forecast. In short, the private sector renewable energy forecasting community is strong and well-positioned to meet the demands of our clients worldwide, both today and into the future. The second point that I would like to make is that the government does have an important and fundamental role in supporting the private sector in our task of creating more accurate renewable energy forecasts. 3-tier, as well as our competitors, rely on accurate government weather forecasts on both the regional and global scale as inputs to our more specialized energy forecast systems. The government operates a reliable national network of routine surface and upper air weather observations. It also develops and operates sophisticated computer weather forecast models that ingest these data and produce weather forecasts. Improve the quality of these weather forecasts by improving the observational inputs, the models themselves, and the systems that create the forecasts, and the private sector will improve the quality of the renewable energy forecasts. Improving the accuracy of the nation's fundamental weather forecasts is an enormous challenge. This charge falls squarely on the Department of Commerce, where NOAA is uniquely positioned to accomplish these improvements through its Office of Atmospheric Research and other divisions. Doing so will not only improve the quality of renewable energy forecasts supplied by the private sector, but will aid the National Weather Service in its primary mission of protecting life and property, and will provide benefits to transportation, agriculture, and other economic sectors, ensuring that investments made here are not solely for the benefit of one industry. The last point that I would like to make is that the roles of the government and the private sector in renewable energy forecasting need to be clearly defined. Fundamental research and infrastructure investments are required to improve the nation's weather forecasts, but these should not be confused with applied research and product development for specific industries and end users. The public sector can and should provide the best possible scientific foundation upon which the private sector can do what it does best: drive innovation and deliver services nimbly and competitively to our customers. Confusion in these roles blurs the line between business and government, creates a distorted marketplace, and ultimately increases the tax burden while squeezing out the very companies that are effectively serving these markets. To be clear, it is essential that the federal agencies provide fundamental research, data collection, and accurate foundational weather forecasts without then inserting themselves into the marketplace as an alternative to the private sector, thereby undermining a vibrant industry of small businesses like ours. In these times of strong renewable energy industry growth and federal stimulus program funding, there is an opportunity, if not the obligation, for the public sector to work aggressively toward complementing the private sector's capabilities. Working together will allow American companies to continue to lead the world's clean energy revolution. But for these companies to lead, we need to make sure that they don't find that their biggest competitor is their own government, both at home and abroad. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Stork. Mr. Rosenblum, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Congressman Tonko and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the important function entity forecasting will play in our ability to successfully integrate increasing levels of variable renewable resources into the power system. As a representative of a transmission system operator, my perspective is that of a consumer of forecasting services, and in particular, one that has the responsibility for keeping the lights on for approximately 30 million Californians, and for doing so in a manner as economically efficient as possible. To provide brief but hopefully unnecessary context to my comments, a fundamental but not exclusive requirement for keeping the lights on is maintaining a constant and precise balance between electric supply and demand. Wind and solar resources add to the operator's balancing challenge by increasing the system's aggregate volatility, given their inherent variability in output and uncertainty as to the timing and magnitude of the fluctuations. Accordingly, the central issue operators confront with additional renewable resources is whether sufficient backup resources can be committed and maneuvered up or down fast enough to compensate for changes in variable renewable resource output. while more flexible conventional resources such as pump storage and modern combustion turbines and innovative technologies including on- and off-site storage and demand response will likely play a major role in managing renewable resource variability in the future, improvements in forecasting also offer potentially substantial and, importantly, more expeditious assistance in achieving continued grid reliability, market efficiency, and greenhouse gas reductions. Based on this perspective, the California ISO offers 3 conclusions and recommendations. First, forecasting improvements appear to significantly reduce resource requirements for integrating renewable resources. A preliminary ISO analysis of a 33% RPS scenario consistent with current California policy direction indicates that if we were able to cut by nearly 1/2 our current forecasting error rates of approximately 15% in the day ahead and 10% hour ahead, we could reduce the quantity of capacity that must be available for dispatch in our real-time energy market by approximately 25 to 35%, or nearly 2,000 megawatts. While the ISO has not completed its analysis of the potential cost savings on its system of this improvement, increases in forecasting accuracy will necessarily lead to more efficient and therefore less costly resource utilization. Second, improvements in forecasting appear to rest in significant part in improvements by the federal government in the quality and quantity of data provided to the electricity industry and its private sector forecast partners. In particular, it is the federal government improvement in the underlying physics-based atmospheric models that form the baseline input for most resource forecasters that should be focused upon. As part of a recent RFP for forecasting services by the ISO observed a high degree of correlation among the forecast errors committed by the participating private forecast service providers. This suggests that those federal agencies responsible for developing numerical weather prediction models should tune their efforts by focusing on areas with concentrations of high renewable resources. In addition, it should be noted that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission should be commended and should continue its efforts to address many of the root causes of poor data quality received from the generating facilities themselves. This includes improvement in the rules and requirements regarding reporting of meteorological data, equipment outage, and other critical factors. Third, it should be emphasized that a transmission system operator must not only have accurate prediction of average production over a specified period, but it must also anticipate the speed, magnitude, and timing of changes over different operating periods. Therefore, forecasting improvement efforts must focus on increasing our ability to predict wind and solar ramp events and the underlying weather conditions that cause such events. Thank you for this opportunity to come before you, and I welcome questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenblum. Dr. Michaels, please.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. We're at a hearing on forecasting, and given the recent record of economists in forecasting about everything, one might wonder why I'm here. The answer is fairly straightforward. This is a committee on both science and technology. Science about forecasting atmospheric motions, but the technology that matters for us is the technology of wind power, and they are both interrelated in economic terms. Renewables now contribute approximately 3.5% of the nation's electrical energy. A few years ago, they were producing about 2%. Essentially, all of that growth in renewables has been due to the growth of wind power. If you are committed to renewables, given the technologies that are on the horizon, you are committed to wind. Wind is going to be the dominant renewable probably for the foreseeable future. If so, then what this committee must do as it evaluates the funding of this improved forecasting is to ask itself, what is going to be the future role of wind? Is it going to be worth the public investment given wind's track record and given wind's likely prospects? Wind now is a very special source of energy. It's essentially the only renewable that's really easy to build now, but it still lives on subsidies. It lives on renewable energy mandates. It lives on the production tax credit. We know that. We've got lots of statistical records of that. There may be rationales for some of these subsidies. In my testimony, I'd say I don't find them very convincing, but that's another story. The question that matters to us is that we are accumulating evidence on the viability of wind, and we are accumulating a lot of practical questions about whether we should rethink its future or not. We know, for instance, that now states, even with renewable mandates, are having trouble building transmission, having trouble siting such plants. We're understanding now that the way they interact with the rest of the electrical system has very interesting consequences, sometimes adverse consequences for carbon emissions and emissions of criteria pollutants. We have a lot of evidence to still accumulate and a lot to learn. The practical questions are then, how are you going to interface this? Because you must be in the process of making your decision today. You are implicitly saying something about the future desirability and the future evolution of wind power in this country. You have a tremendous number of developments taking place that are changing everything we know about the energy picture. You now have a revolution in the natural gas industry, which may well guarantee us clean, economical energy independence with it. If that's so, then again we may rethink wind. There are questions are mounting about climate policy and what exactly will happen if climate policy changes in either direction. So we have a set of questions which are really the kinds of questions economists ask. They are questions, that awful word from elementary economics, they are marginal questions. What is going to be the value of what you do? What will be the value of funding this work, supporting this work, given the current state of the wind industry and given its many possible futures? And when you make a decision here, you are implicitly saying something about what you believe the future of the wind industry is going to be. The question would be, what if all wind construction stopped today? What would you be doing? Would this be funding that was worth engaging in, or wouldn't it be? That is the question that this committee must decide. I can't. What you are doing is a simultaneous determination of how to handle the forecasting models and support them, and the future role of wind. That role is going to need, I think, to be rethought in light of the accumulating evidence, but in any case, it's critical that we think about it in connection with what's before this committee today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michaels. I thank all the witnesses. I'm glad to be able to join the hearing. At this point, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a favor of you?
Of course.
We are the Energy Committee. Can we save some energy by turning down the air conditioning in this room? It is freezing.
If we can't, I'll loan you my jacket. But
Well,
I agree
no,
with you.
I mean,
No,
I'm
I
talking
agree
about
with you
waste.
entirely. Let's have
Okay.
staff try to work on it.
That's your problem.
I'll wait. There's a solution. Can I borrow your jacket? And I'll give it to her.
Take it to her.
Okay, here we go.
The point is we're wasting energy.
I agree with you.
I yield to her. She's a great lady. She's running this committee for the last 3 weeks.
Thanks, Ms. Woolsey. I appreciate your observation. I share that. We cooled this place down to outrageous levels. So we, in the Pacific Northwest, we have a great deal of hydro. We're putting in an awful lot of wind. And one of the things that people at Bonneville, and I know some of you have testified about this issue in general, talks about is the challenge of integrating the grid. And I know that's been much of your testimony. What, if I missed it, forgive me, what are the estimated savings? If we can more precisely tell of a concentrated solar plant or a wind farm, expect this amount of wind, that should lead to X amount of output. In our region, that might mean you have to put less energy through the turbine or lower the, or you could maybe use your base load somewhere else, et cetera. How much do we save if we can make better predictions of this?
Mr. Chairman, we've recently completed a study called the Western Wind and Solar Integration Study, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, that is. And we showed as one example, and there are a number of studies that I cite in my written testimony that give specific quantification to those savings, but just as an example, in the Western Wind and Solar Study, we compared for 27% wind and solar penetration in the 14-state Western Interconnection region. We compared operating that system with no forecasting compared to state-of-the-art forecasting, and then compared that to perfect forecasting. Going from no forecasting to state-of-the-art forecasting, there was a savings of approximately $5 billion, which is annually, which is about 14% of the total operations cost. The savings going from state-of-the-art to perfect is somewhat incremental, additional roughly 10% savings, but still a significant sum of money of about $500 million.
That's a tremendous amount, and it would seem that also it allows your base load to maybe be channeled into different other possible uses, especially as you get smart grids up and maybe certain industries with high demands, they would run their high demand operations during periods of abundance in the renewable side to take advantage of excess base load. So any others wishing to comment on that? Ms. Rosenblum?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are currently engaged in a 33% RPS analysis within the California ISO. We have done, the first part of our study has tried to quantify what the benefits would be of different portfolios of renewable resources, and part of the sensitivities that we ran were what happens if we were able to reduce the level of errors that we're currently experiencing with wind, and we extrapolated for solar to the experience in Germany, which has much more solar PV penetration than we do, and reduce those approximately in half. And what we found was that under those scenarios, we would essentially reduce the amount of capacity that we would need in a real-time environment by approximately 2,000 megawatts or more in the spring and summer months. And that equates to the commitment of multiple combined cycle turbines. So we think that we would see a significant, we haven't translated that to dollars, and we're doing so, but we think that will translate to significant operational and cost savings to consumers.
You know, this issue of more precise predicting, you know, I grew up in farm country, and I remember if it was time to bring in the hay, gosh, you would watch to the hour whether the rain forecast was coming, because if it was going to rain, you couldn't bring in the hay. And if it was going to rain, we would work round the clock to get it in and get it into the barn before it got wet, if we could. So now we're applying the same kind of fairly precise micro forecasting, but to the energy sector. Ms. Simler, in your discussion of the, you state in your written testimony that existing operational practices or market rules have the effect of imposing unnecessary costs or burdens on both variable energy resources and transmission. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I can try. We don't have any quantitative studies. We rely on studies that others have done. But the idea there is similar to what you've heard so far, is that if we can have better forecasting, that would allow better forecasting for better predictions. You would free up other resources to provide energy. You wouldn't have to have as many resources committed for reserves.
But I appreciate that, and I may be drilling down too much, and we can get to it later if we want, because I'm almost out of time. But you mentioned specifically market rules. Are there market rules that are particular come to mind that may be in somehow conflict with the issues we're discussing here?
That's part of what the notice of inquiry was supposed to do, was to explore what the market rules, if there are market rules, and if there are, then the Commission can take action to remedy them.
I see. So you're not saying you have an answer to that. You're trying to say this is a question we need to ask. Gotcha. Right. Okay, good. With that, I recognize my friend, Mr. Hall.
Thank you. I may touch a little on your question, Mr. Chairman, but from Dr. Michaels. But first, I want to ask Ms. Simler, your testimony noted the need for baseload electricity suppliers to back up renewables when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine or you don't have some of the benefits that you would expect and anticipate. And by the way, I read the other day where some of the women out in West Texas were objecting to Boone Pickens towers because it was blowing their hair. I don't know how serious that is, but something happened to it. But there are some of them get cold and when the weather and the temperature is normal, you know. And I'm picking a fight I can't possibly win. But obviously, the unpredictable nature of weather presents some kind of a burden and adds cost to the baseload supplier support. And these costs are going to only increase as we add more renewables to the grid. I guess my question is, how significant are these costs? I think you've touched on it. And will FERC make that determination as to who ought to pay for them? And could you give us some kind of an idea as to the responses to your notice of inquiry about this issue?
Yes. To the extent that variable resources impose additional costs on the grid due to having to have other generation standing ready to provide reserves, and as I said, that generation standing ready to provide reserves can be reduced with better forecasting. But to the extent that that occurs, customers will have to pay a portion, a share of that. I mean, at the end of the day, customers pay. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to the extent that those are part of the wholesale rates, would decide which customers pay.
Well, let me ask Dr. Michaels. You referenced DOE electricity cost data in your testimony and note that renewables are significantly more expensive than conventional sources on a levelized basis. I guess, Dr. Michaels, my question would be, do you expect this to change the future as more renewables are added to the electricity mix as a result maybe of subsidies or mandates or some other unknown or undetected aid? Are subsidies driving technology advances, and in the current economic environment, how much is too much to provide in subsidies or renewables?
Are the subsidies driving the technology advancement? I think the way to look at it is, what is the form that the subsidies are taking?
Is your mic on, Dr. Michaels? I'm not sure.
I think the way to look at it is, if that's so, what is the form that the subsidies are taking? Because for wind in particular, the subsidies, the great bulk of them are in the form of production tax credit, basically just a cash flow in the industry. It's not a subsidy for research. Wind is progressing. Wind has progressed, but at this point we know that the rate of productivity increase is slowing down. And that's something that is taking place all over the world. It's an international industry. There is still improvement, but it is a much slower improvement than before. Beyond that, I can't extrapolate.
Any other want to make any suggestion along that line? Let me ask Dr. Michaels. You note in your testimony that in Texas and Colorado it's been found that large increases in wind power production resulted in increases in pollutant emissions and unchanged CO2 emissions, because the baseload electricity required to support the wind power operations forced coal generators to make unusually quick adjustments that increase pollution. Has this problem been studied more in depth to determine its significance, if any, and impact?
At this point, this is the only study that is outstanding, and it is a study that came as a fairly complete surprise to the entire industry. It may well be that Texas and Colorado have some degree of uniqueness because they are more dependent on cycling coal units than many other parts of the country. So how it generalizes is not clear, and whether its quantitative importance will be the same, again, we don't know. I'm putting it forward as another question that you should think of, though, if you are intending to encourage the further development of wind.
I'm just going to ask how much are such quick adjustments necessary?
They have to, these are the people who are the experts in it, but the basic answer is because wind is intermittent. For small problems, it's no different from the outage of an ordinary electrical generator.
Well,
when you're looking at the region.
My time's up.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Ms. Woolsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who would ever have anticipated that the NOAA Weather Service would become part of our daily news and entertainment cycle in the United States of America? I mean, I have a friend who would rather watch the weather station than any of the other television stations. And we also know that people follow storms like a sporting event. I mean, this is really something that we've accomplished through NOAA, and knowing ahead of time what could be coming, and sometimes it doesn't, but that's, forecasting is really something. And there's an economic benefit to the media for bringing viewers and readers because of NOAA's product. I mean, so that's what a service that is. But we want to improve on this. That's what we're talking about today. So we want to meet the President's goals, many of us, and we want to save the $5 billion a year at least that has been reported here. So, I mean, why aren't we already doing this? And what do we really need to do? That's my question. I mean, each one of you has said we can, we must, you know, and we should. What will be the federal government's role? What will be private industry's role? And Dr. Stork, you talked on that, so let's hear from the others. You did get to that slightly, but I want to know what you think our role is and what private industry's role is. Do you have a thought on that, Ms. Simler?
I'll let others speak to that.
Okay, thank you. Dr. McDonald.
Thank you. NOAA is always trying to improve its weather forecasts, and most people do recognize they've gotten a lot better. And I appreciate your comments about, I actually do have friends that their favorite channel is the Weather Channel, but that's because I'm in weather.
Well, they need to get along.
We are improving our forecasts. They partly improve because we understand the weather better, and because as computers get faster, our models get better. But there's some unusual things about renewables. For example, you really care about the winds, fairly high above the ground, about 300 feet is where the power is. And we used to kind of say partly cloudy, but partly cloudy is not good enough when you can have clouds sort of go over an entire city and change the amount of photovoltaic energy available. So what we want to do is improve our networks and improve our models, really going specifically after those things needed for renewable energy. We know how to do that. It's higher resolution, and it's observing using things that, like we have things called SODARs that actually can measure the winds 100 meters above the ground. So we have some great ideas to go after it, and we're going to keep working on it.
So, okay, you have the ideas. Do you have the technology, and do you have the equipment, or are we depending on private industry to provide this?
Well, I see us as depending on private industry for some of the new technology. I mentioned some of these new wind measuring. So it is going to require, I think, some investments to improve our systems. But in any case, we're going to be working on it because improved weather helps everything. It helps aviation. It helps renewable energy. So, but there's some specific things for renewable energy that we really do need.
Okay. Dr. Michaels, you hate wind. Poor wind. But isn't wind just part of the solution? I mean, it's not the whole thing.
The nation's undergoing yet another energy transition. The nation is undergoing yet another energy transition of the same sort that it's made in the past, from wood to coal to oil to electricity. And it may well be a transition that has a greater role for wind. I do not hate any particular source of energy, and I also do not hate efficiency. But it's important to think about what wind's role really is, because some facts are coming to light, and its role in the system is, I think, in need of a little bit more rethinking. That's my major point.
Okay. Dr. Stork, what do you think about what will be private industry's role in this? We just have 10 seconds.
Role is fairly clear, as I see. Private industry relies on the forecasts that NOAA creates, and we take those forecasts of the weather, and we make them very specific and relevant to a wind farm. Regardless of how many computers and scientists NOAA employs, it can never get into the details of every particular wind farm in the United States. And remember, we export our technologies globally as well. So we need NOAA to produce better weather forecasts, and then we can take it from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Woolsey. I wouldn't expect the panelists to be aware of this, but the gentleman now about to ask questions is probably the leading authority in the Congress on some of this, because he is virtually off the grid, if not entirely off the grid, and has been doing renewable energy in his home, walking the talk for many, many years. So with that, I'm pleased to recognize Dr. Bartlett.
Thank you very much. You know, in thinking about these alternative energies, we need to think about them in a different context. The context in which we ordinarily consider them is the present context, where about half of our electricity comes from coal. And if you're comparing these renewables with fossil fuels, they aren't going to look very good, because the quantity and quality of energy in fossil fuels is just unsurpassed. Where else can you find that quantity and quality of energy? The general statement is that we have 250 years of coal at current use rates. Be careful with that current use rates, because just 2% increase doubles in 35 years, 4 times bigger in 70 years, 8 times bigger in 105 years, 16 times bigger in 140 years. I hope we'll still be here as a country 140 years from now. The National Academy of Sciences says that we probably have 100 years of coal at current use rates. But even if we have the 250 years and you increase its use only 2%, and we will increase its use more than that, as we have to turn to coal for gas and liquids. But even if you increase it only 2%, the 250 years now drops to 85 years. That's the power of compound interest, which Albert Einstein says was the most powerful force in the universe. And now if you take some of the energy from that coal to produce a gas or liquid, now it shrinks to 50 years. And there is an inevitability that few people understand, and that is that you will share it with the world of necessity. Because if we're getting oil from coal, then the Saudi oil goes to somebody else. So in reality, you have no choice but to share it with the world. What that means is that the 50 years now shrinks to 12 and a half years. So if you make two assumptions, one is that the use of coal will increase just 2%, and the other is the inevitability that you will share it with the world. We have 12 and a half years of coal left. So the context in which we need to be thinking about these alternative energies is a world in which we do not have the abundance of fossil fuels that we have today. Then they start to look a whole lot different, don't they? But we have huge problems with the intermittent production of energy by wind and by sun. And so we need hugely increased focus today on storage, do we not? Because you can get all the energy that you need from solar. You can get all the energy you need from wind, but boy, is it sporadic. And we have grossly inadequate ways of storing it today. Where are we in this balance between looking at the renewables and looking at ways of storing the energy? Because don't you think that the utility of these renewables in the future will be largely dependent on our ability to quickly store and release the energy we get from them?
Congressman Bartlett, can I first address that? I think one of the first things, before we engage wholly in the idea of storage, which I do think is important, is we need to look at other market structure improvements, such as larger geographic areas in which we transact energy, because I think that may be a more direct way to increase the flexibility of resources that we utilize to balance the variability that you were talking about.
You really can't this stuff too far, can you? Unlike oil, you put a gallon in here and 1,000 miles away a gallon comes out. You put electrons in a wire at this end and 1,000 miles away, nothing may come out as a result of line loss. Aren't there some limitations to equalizing, to normalizing the production if you just include the whole country?
Well, I would say that's something we need to study, but one of the things that we have observed is that the broader the geographic area that you can use to balance, there probably are benefits, and we need to look at transmission associated with that. You're correct.
Congressman Bartlett, I think you raise a very important point, and just as wind or any single technology is not the solution, there, in addition to forecasting, there are many things that we can do to address the variability of wind and solar generating plants. Storage, I think, is certainly one and will likely be a part of the solution. There are, as was discussed here earlier, there are market structure that could be changed to make integration easier. There are operational techniques that can be implemented. For example, looking at wider geographic areas for integrating renewables. So, and that is on top of potential efficiency and demand response technologies and techniques. So there's a whole portfolio, if we look at this as an entire system, that will help to address that variability.
Thank you, Dr. Bartlett. Dr. Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for the delay in being here. I have two committee meetings going on simultaneously. On the storage issue, of course, Michigan, my state, has more experience than most with the pump storage facility that Consumers Power put in, and which has worked remarkably well outside of killing a lot of fish initially. But they've managed to put up a net that's good enough to keep the fish from getting in. And it's worked rather well. Every night, the otherwise idle plants are sending electricity up there, pumping water up, I think about 200 feet up the hill into a lake. And during the day, let it flow down. The same turbines turn the other way and produce electricity. Unfortunately, that's a geographic scarcity to have a situation like that. But nevertheless, they've proved it works. And so that can be a model. And I worry, Mr. Bartlett and I are much in the same vein on this issue. We very much support the renewable industry in whatever form it manages to survive. That's a very good direction to go. But that's only part of it. I really don't like that term renewable because it's not renewable. I mean, sunlight is always there, but it's not really renewable. Not much we can do about it. But at any rate, all those alternative forms of energy, which I think is probably a better way of saying it, are essential for us. We have to use them. We have to develop them. We have to make them work well. And here, as in so many cases, including automobiles, the biggest stumbling block is having a good method of storage. And so particularly in homes, my fond dream is that eventually every home in America will have solar shingles at not much greater cost than ordinary shingles. That makes solar power very economically feasible. But again, where do you store it? Buying batteries can be expensive and erratic, but nevertheless that appears to be the best thing at this point. And I would be delighted if someone can develop really good batteries or better methods of storage than we're used to having. So that's not a question, Mr. Chairman, that's more an editorial, but I really appreciate what you're doing and what you're working on. It's absolutely essential, I think. As the spill in the Gulf is pointing out, we have problems with every source of energy. And energy by its very nature creates some of its own problems because you need ways of containing it, preserving it, shipping it, and so forth. So thank you for what you're doing, and I'll yield back at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. Mr. Rohrbacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And as a preface to what I'm about to say is that I, of course, again, for the record, state that I think that the global warming CO2 theory is nonsense. And those of us who have found ourselves in combat on this, quote, global warming issue, realize that there's more to the energy argument and the energy issue than simply trying to say that we're not going to put more CO2 in the air, which I might add, as we all know, over the Earth's history, there has been many times more CO2 in the air at wonderful times in the world's history. But beside that, back to energy, and that is, those of us who have that disagreement don't disagree that we need to be developing our energy resources to the maximum degree so that America can benefit both in economically and in terms of our national security. With that, I have been very active in supporting various alternative energy sources rather than just oil and gas. And I happen to have bought onto the theory that we should be moving towards electrifying America, that we should be looking at electric energy as a source of transportation, et cetera. With that said, I have also been dismayed that quite often those people who are supposedly dedicated for the global warming theory or whatever motivates them to producing clean electricity, that in California at least, they seem to be putting up roadblocks, and I think this is true in other places as well, to actually putting in place solar energy installations. And I have a bill, H.R. 964, which would facilitate the development and the building of solar installations in the desert. And what apparently we have now is 205, or at least over 200 applications at the Bureau of Land Management that have been sitting there for years for people who would like to build solar plants in the middle of the desert, but can't get the Bureau of Land Management to give them a permit to build. Now, something's wrong there. Something's wrong with that equation, and I'd like to ask the panel, what's going on here? I mean, are we committed to it to the point that lizards and insects and their habitat is more important than developing the energy? Or can we say that, yes, developing electric solar power in the desert is worth eliminating the habitat for a small number of insects and lizards, who can then scurry someplace else, I might add. So I'd like to ask the panel that. What about siting of solar plants and other alternative plants as well, I might add?
The issue of siting these kinds of plants is being very interesting in California for a lot more reasons than just that. Among other things, even if they get sited, nobody's going to be able to build transmission to them. The question...
I will have to tell you that I am personally involved with several sightings that the transmission lines go right through and is right there. So I'd like to say that, yes, that is true. We don't have electric lines or any way to get it onto the grid in many of these, but in many of them they do have access to the grid and access to transmission lines. Go ahead. Sorry.
But if this is the case, this has been the question that's always had to be looked at. We've only relatively recently in our history became aware that much of what we do does have consequences for the environment. The real question is always a rule of reason. How do you value the environmental amenities, the value of species biodiversity, against the value of the power? Is there, in fact, an easier way to get it, a cheaper way to get it, a cleaner way to get it? Those are the kinds of questions that is a combination of markets and regulation. The question of how the solar units are getting built, how they're being financed, are they getting some sort of subsidies, tax breaks, questions like those. You've got to look at all those aspects of them. It may well be that these are intrinsically uneconomic and you wouldn't want them in the desert were it not for certain special treatment that they get.
As a transmission planning entity, we do see that there's a definite chicken and the egg problem in California. Do we build the transmission and have them come to it, or do we wait for siting to take its course and then build the transmission out there? We're trying to be proactive, but also take into consideration the environmental limitations that are occurring. So it is a difficult process, as you point out.
Would any of you be supportive of legislation that said on its very face building a solar plant is positive towards the environment, and thus they should be, their grant process with BLM should be facilitated? Would anyone support that on the panel? Okay, thank you.
Shall we let the record show that there was no...
There was no great response to that question.
I don't know if we want a lengthy second round, but there's a topic that I don't think's been addressed, and I just want to raise it with my colleagues' indulgence. And that has to do with Dr. Stork. Your model is a private entity providing forecasting or predicting, I'm not sure the proper term, information for the purpose of renewable energy entities, and I think predominantly wind, as I understand it. I'm interested in that private sector. Two main questions come to mind. One, we've heard a little bit about the economic benefits that could be achieved if we had more precise forecasting. I want to learn what we need to do to get that to be achieved. What has to be added to the system or done better from what we already do. But secondly, this interface. You know, there's some really bright folks out doing little iPhone apps for free, but they need public access to information. And I'm looking at, the question I would have is, do we really need a federal investment in certain information gathering infrastructure that then becomes open source so that then private entities can use it? What do we need to do to make this better, and how do the private enterprises work with government agencies?
Thank you. I'll start with that question. First, to capture the value of renewable energy forecasts, you do need a system that can allow you to extract that value. You need a market. Continuing with your analogy of sort of making hay, if I tell you that it's going to rain in another hour and you know that perfectly, what you really need is someone to help you make hay. You don't need to know that it's going to rain within the next hour. You know, that's just a piece of information. So it's what you do with the information. So markets and systems allow renewable energy to be moved from one location to the next, and they allow that value to be captured. And in the NREL study that was referred to, the fundamental assumption with looking at the value of forecasts is that markets behaved rationally and that you were able to move power from one area to the next. It didn't consider things like a $100 per megawatt hour imbalance penalty that would be what I would call an irrational market. Secondly, to your issue of observations and open source, yeah, it's a very important point. To really predict wind energy on an hour-ahead basis, we need more than just a weather forecast. We need access to those observations that ring the wind farms and perhaps that our clients at the wind farms have installed themselves. So providing these observations that NOAA might put in, and not just feeding those observations into their supercomputing models, but making those observations available to the renewable energy industry. And not just wind. We heard the last two congressmen talked about solar. We need to think beyond just wind here, because once we do get to your vision of shingles as PV panels, we're going to be having a hearing about solar forecasting and cloud tracking. Thank you.
Dr. McDonald?
Chairman Baird, I think NOAA and the private commercial sector have really grown in our ability to work together. There was a report called the Fair Weather Report done back in 2003. NOAA worked on policies, and I agree with Dr. Storck that NOAA should put out the best possible forecast, but the private commercial sector can work with the very specific needs of something like the renewable industry to tailor the forecast that they need. So I think there's an excellent cooperation, and it kind of says that as we improve NOAA's observing networks and NOAA's computing and forecasting, we improve everything. We improve aviation, we improve public forecasts like the blizzard forecast this winter. So it's something where I liked your words, open source. We operate, we sort of get the best forecast, make it available, and the better our forecasts get, the more companies like Dr. Storck's company make money.
Let me ask a slightly different variation of that. So forecast is some degrees of distant from raw data. Is the raw data open source as well?
It is, right.
Okay.
We make it all available, and nowadays on the Internet it's quite easy. There is one distinction on that, and that is sometimes there's proprietary data. For example, one wind farm and one company may say, I don't want my neighboring one to have it. And we've proposed that NOAA kind of be the honest broker where we would get the data and have it, but we would use it to improve the forecast.
The other question then would be, and I don't know that we have time to answer it here, but we've heard estimates in the billions of dollars of savings through increased productivity and efficiency. I'm wondering what the cost would be to realize those billions of dollars in terms of new instrumentation, additional data. Dr. Storck, you allude to a few new subsets of information gathering technologies, and if there are others who want to speak to that.
Real quick, the billions of dollars of savings is what's realized with the current state-of-the-art forecasts that are available to the industry today. That's a very important point to make. We've come a long way, and we already provide tremendous value to the industry. The incremental improvements on a day-ahead forecast time horizon, which is what the NREL study looked at, was another $500 million for the wind energy industry. That's significant money, but I wouldn't spend $500 million just to get there.
Okay. So you feel that with existing technologies and data used more effectively, we can already realize substantial savings, and that's your business model.
Yes, and the fundamental question we have in integration is forecasting wind energy changes in the next hour to next, say, 5 minutes, and that's going to require thinking a little bit outside the box of just supercomputers and weather forecast models and really getting into the details of more advanced weather observation systems. The question becomes, who pays for that? Is that the owner-operator of the wind farm, or is that the taxpayer?
I'll give my colleagues, if there are any colleague dying for a second round. Dr. Bartlett?
Of course, an alternative to storage is simply to try to match an intermittent production of electricity with an intermittent use of electricity. And there are many uses that we have of electricity that could be inherently intermittent. When your air conditioner comes on, whether it was 5 minutes ago or 5 minutes from now, makes little difference in how cool your house is going to be. And there are many manufacturing processes where you simply could stockpile some material when you had energy available and use it when the energy is not available. Of course, there are always going to be some inefficiencies in doing that, but there are also inefficiencies in storing it if you have a constant load and an intermittent production. To what extent are we investing in these kinds of studies so that we can create a more flexible load to match an intermittent production?
You already have the growth of an industry which essentially makes what the product they call themselves making is virtual power plants. There are companies like one called NREL, which essentially sign up people and tell them that they're going to control their loads in exchange for certain rewards in order to help the power system cope with its operating problems. So these industries already exist, and they apparently are able to make a profit off it, and the question is possibly how to grow them.
I'd like to comment on that, if I may. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has due to Congress this month, I think by June 19th, a national action plan on demand response. And what Dr. Michaels just referred to with NREL, they're providers of demand response, and demand response can complement the variability of wind energy resources. So FERC last June did a study on the assessment of the potential of demand response in the country, and like I said, this week the report should be going to Congress on the action plan, which talks about support for states and others about how to achieve the potential identified in that assessment. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, and also just recently, DOE has made hundreds of millions of dollars of funding available for what's called smart grid demonstration projects, and we're a member of one of those projects in the Pacific Northwest. And the idea is to look at demand response and basically information services that support the electric grid to match supply, particularly from renewables. And in the Pacific Northwest, we've got a lot of wind, and it's all in one spot. So when the wind is blowing, we really want something on the power system to consume that resource. And these are large-scale, 5-year duration demonstration projects that are currently getting underway. So there's a lot of interest there, and funding.
The ISO has recently submitted to FERC a modification to its ancillary service market requirements to try to facilitate the participation of demand in those markets.
As a small example of what one might do, if you have a well-insulated hot water tank in your home and you're heating it electrically, it will make little difference when you heat that water. It could all be heated at 2 a.m. in the morning, for instance, and last you for the whole day if it were large enough and well enough insulated. So there are enormous opportunities out there for varying the load, and I suspect that that may be simpler and cheaper than storage in many cases, and I'm glad that we're pursuing this with some vigor, apparently. Thank you all very much for your answers, and yield back.
Dr. Bartley, I think it's an excellent line of questioning. One of the issues we discovered in the Northwest, and I think elsewhere, is communities, when you try to look at conservation, there's a risk that they lose their access to load. When they start using less, then they're entitled to less in the future. So one of the issues we have to deal with FERC and other management entities is make sure that demand management doesn't cost you guaranteed access, because that's a disincentive that's built into some of our current agreements. Ms. Woolsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Mooney, we've talked about saving money and increasing energy. We haven't talked about renewable energy, creating and investing in more jobs in this country. Has your lab taken that on as one of your measurements?
We do have a group at the laboratory that is called the Strategic Energy Analysis Center. That center has a focus, among other things, of looking at the economic and job impacts of various renewable energy and efficiency deployment scenarios. So we do that, and I'm happy to get you additional information on what we do there.
Mostly, I would like to know what they've concluded.
Well, generally, I'll say, without being able to quote specific numbers, is that there is economic benefit, job creation benefit to renewable energy and energy efficiency development, manufacturing, and deployment in the U.S.
And would anybody else like to comment on that? Dr. Michaels.
Yes. The record is decidedly mixed on whether there really is such. There have been studies in the U.S., studies abroad. The problem that you have in the U.S. in particular is the type of computers and modeling that they engage in. There was a study in Spain. It's a controversial study, but they found out that renewable energy was actually a destroyer of jobs because it had such high capital requirements per worker relative to other potential sources of stimulus. The NREL did a study to refute this study, and they used their standard model. And in the process, it came out, NREL's model created jobs. NREL's model mathematically must create jobs. It has to give them the answer that they want. In other words, I don't think that much of this has really been studied to the degree that it should, and so I am concerned about that.
Would anybody else like to respond to that? I mean, do you buy this, that going into the new energy-saving technologies in this country, we're not going to have more jobs?
Well, I could offer a small example. Renewable energy has created 60 very high-paying jobs in Seattle, and a lot of the people that we employ are atmospheric scientists, and they remark to me, you know, it sure is nice to have an alternative to go to other than to work at NOAA. No offense to NOAA. Because without the private sector having a role, that was their option. It was either academia or it was to go work for the government. And now they can roll up their sleeves and they can do something useful supporting renewable energy in this country. We're just one company. Multiply that by all the companies that are out there, and yes, renewable energy creates jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Ehlers, did you have any additional comments?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Mooney, it looks like my staff tells me you look like you wanted to respond to that last one, and with that, then we'll finish up.
I just wanted to offer to the subcommittee that I'm happy to make available to the subcommittee our response to the Spanish jobs report, and I'll make that available to you if you would like.
Thank you very much.
Our intention, though, let me just conclude by saying our intention in any type of study like that is to objectively look at the issues and provide honest information as best as we can determine it. We don't set out in those studies with a predetermined agenda.
So, Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate at this time to ask when we receive it to have that information entered into the record?
I think it certainly would, and Dr. Mooney, we'd welcome that, especially if you have a response to the assertions of Dr. Michaels. And Dr. Michaels, feel free to add your explanation for the assertion that the NREL model produces what they, that is guaranteed to appear that it produces jobs, and you have questions about that. So we'd be happy to look at both those analyses.
Okay. Yeah, the Institute for Energy Research has authored a study about the Spanish study and the NREL response to it, and we'll be happy to give it to you.
Okay, we would appreciate that. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank our panels of witnesses for testifying before the committee today, and I thank my colleagues for very important and informative questions as well. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for answers, such as we've just discussed, to any of the follow-up questions the committee may ask the witnesses. With that, the witnesses are excused with our gratitude, and the hearing stands adjourned.